Every Jedi who has ever held a lightsaber learned the same form first. Not because it's the best, but because it's the oldest. Shicho was built when the Jedi Order was still figuring out what a lightsaber even was. And every form after it exists because of the problems this one created. So let's break down all 7 forms, and the specialized techniques built on top of them, starting with the one that started everything. Form 1, Shicho. Shicho is the foundation of every lightsaber discipline in existence, and it was designed to never kill anyone. The entire philosophy revolves around Sun Gem, a mark of contact where the goal is to disarm your opponent rather than cut them in half. The Jedi ideal baked directly into blade work from day one. Tactically, it's built around wide, sweeping strikes meant for crowd control. The Sarlacc sweep hits everything within range in a single motion, simple, brutal in scope. Designed for a Jedi standing in the middle of multiple enemies and saying none of you are dying today. Here's where it gets weird though. Despite being the most pacifist form in existence, Shicho fostered an emotionally heated mindset during combat. The wide, aggressive movements created enormous temptation toward lethal intent, meaning practitioners needed massive restraint just to use the non-lethal form non-lethally, which is, not ideal, but that simplicity is exactly what created the next problem. Put a Shicho user against one skilled duelist with a lightsaber, and those wide sweeping strikes become a liability, which is exactly why Form 2 was invented. Form 2 Makashi. So Form 1 was great for swinging at a crowd, but the second someone equally skilled pulled out a lightsaber and squared up one-on-one, Shicho fell apart. Makashi exists because of that exact problem. This is the fencing form. One-handed grip, fluid blade work, constant footwork with back and forth charges and sudden retreats. Everything about it prioritizes precision and efficiency over raw power. Where Form 1 says, swing big and hope for the best, Makashi says, I'm going to hit exactly the spot I want, and you're not going to stop me. It even has 2 signature techniques built around that philosophy. Sun Gem targets the opponent's weapon directly, designed to destroy or disarm it with surgical precision. Shiak goes after specific vital points on the body. Both are about control. You're not hacking away at someone, you're picking them apart. And then there's Count Dooku, who took Makashi to its absolute peak. Here's the thing about Dooku that nobody talks about enough. He's a Sith Lord who fights like an aristocrat at a gentleman's duel. One-handed, elegant, zero wasted motion. That directly contradicts everything you'd expect from a dark side user. No rage-fueled power strikes, no overwhelming aggression. Just refined, calculated killing. The form's identity is that contradiction. Makashi users were also uncommonly skilled at defending against force-based attacks, which means this wasn't just an anti-saber form, it was an anti-force user form. The whole package, built to dismantle anyone holding a lightsaber. But all that dueling mastery comes with a cost. Makashi was designed for a galaxy where your biggest threat was another person with a blade. It wasn't designed for what came next. Form 3 Sorsu. Sorsu exists because the galaxy decided that swords weren't enough and everybody needed guns. Once blasters became the standard weapon for basically everyone who wanted to kill a Jedi, Form 1's basic bolt deflection training wasn't cutting it anymore. So the Jedi developed an entire combat philosophy around one idea. Don't die. Here's the thing. Sorsu doesn't look impressive. The blade movements are tight, controlled, constantly in motion, building momentum while burning almost zero energy. A Sorsu master uses what's called the Circle of Shelter, a technique that lets a single practitioner defend against as many as 20 blaster-wielding shooters at once. 20. One Jedi, 20 guns, and nobody lands a shot. The core principle places you within the eye of the storm. Chaos everywhere, blaster fire from every direction, and you're just standing there. Calm, centered, completely unbothered. It's the most Jedi thing a Jedi can do in a fight. And nobody did it better than Obi-Wan Kenobi. Mace Windu himself called Obi-Wan the master of Sorsu right before the Clone Wars ended. That's not a casual compliment. That's the guy who invented his own Form 7 variant, saying, yeah, this man is untouchable. But here's where it gets complicated. Sorsu was designed for survival, not victory. Not, you can outlast anyone, but you can't beat anyone. A perfect Sorsu practitioner can deflect every attack thrown at them and still lose because they never create an opening to finish the fight. It's defensive perfection with zero offensive capability, which is, not ideal. This exact paradox frustrated so many Jedi that they went and created an entirely new form to fix it. But before we get to Form 5's answer to that problem, we need to talk about the form that went in the complete opposite direction of Sorasu's patience. Form 4, Ataru. This is the form that made every kid in the theater try to backflip off their couch after watching the prequels. Ataru is pure spectacle, force-enhanced acrobatics, somersaults, leaping strikes from every conceivable angle, all delivered at speeds so fast that practitioners literally appear as a blur. It's the most visually insane form in the entire Jedi arsenal, and it's been around since at least the Mandalorian Wars. The philosophy is simple: overwhelm a single opponent so completely that the fight ends before they can figure out what's happening. Ataru practitioners don't just attack from the front, they attack from the sides, from above, from behind, cycling through strike angles faster than most fighters can track. The signature technique, the Hawkbat swoop, lets you close distance with a devastating strike and immediately disengage before your opponent can retaliate. Hit and vanish. Hit and vanish. Now here's the thing. Two of the most famous Ataru masters are Qui-Gon Jinn and Yoda, and they tell you everything about this form's strengths and weaknesses. Yoda used Ataru on Kashyyyk during Order 66, and it worked beautifully because his tiny body basically required the acrobatics. For him, every fight is a confined space problem, and Ataru solved it by turning him into a spinning green pinball of death, which is, effective. But Qui-Gon died fighting Darth Maul in a narrow hallway. Ataru's fatal flaw is that it burns through stamina at an absurd rate and completely falls apart in tight spaces. The form that looks the most incredible on screen is paradoxically one of the most dangerous to its own user if the fight drags on too long. But if Ataru is all about speed and aggression, the next form took the opposite approach and turned defense into a weapon. Form 5, Cheyenne and DM So. So here's where the lightsaber forms start getting morally complicated. Form 5 exists because a bunch of Form 3 practitioners looked at Sorasu and said, cool, we can block everything forever, but we can't actually win. Surviving indefinitely without ever creating an opening to end the fight wasn't just tactically frustrating. It was seen as a philosophical failure. So they built something with teeth. Form 5 splits into two distinct disciplines. Sheen came first, optimized for deflecting blaster bolts back at the people shooting them. Not just blocking, redirecting. Gem So came later, built for lightsaber versus lightsaber combat. The core mechanic across both is using your opponent's own momentum against them. Every defensive block flows immediately into a counterattack with zero gap between the parry and the strike. You don't defend and then attack. You defend by attacking. The signature techniques tell you everything. The falling avalanche is a devastating overhand power blow designed to end conversations. The barrier of blades turns incoming blaster fire into a wall of redirected death. And the fluid riposte creates seamless parry to counter transitions so smooth, there's literally no moment where you're not threatening your opponent. Now here's the thing, some Jedi absolutely hated this. They argued Form 5 encouraged domination, that it fed the desire to overpower rather than protect. And then there's Anakin Skywalker, who mastered Gem So and became the single best argument for both sides simultaneously, a form that bridges defense and aggression, practiced by the man who bridges Jedi and Sith. That's not a coincidence. That's foreshadowing written into the combat system itself. Form 5 never fell out of favor because it works. But if you think a form with an identity crisis is complicated, wait until you see the one that tried to be everything at once. Form 6, Neiman. Here's the thing about Neiman. It's not bad at anything. It's not great at anything either. And that's entirely the point. Form 6 was built by taking elements from every form that came before it and blending them into a single hybrid system. A little bit of Shicho's wide coverage, some of Sorasu's defensive awareness, touches of Ataru's mobility, Gemso's counter pressure, basically everything except Makashi's razor-sharp dueling precision got tossed into the blender. What came out was the most balanced lightsaber form ever created, which sounds like a compliment until you realize balanced is just a polite way of saying average at everything, and the Jedi Order loved it. They called it the Diplomat's form, because its training demands were so relaxed that practitioners could spend most of their time doing literally anything else, studying, meditating, negotiating trade disputes. The form was so low maintenance that it actively encouraged weaving force powers directly into combat to compensate for the relaxed blade work. telekinetic pushes mid-swing, force-assisted repositioning, that kind of thing. Niemann was the first form to treat the Force as a direct combat supplement rather than just a tool for jumping higher. Now here's a fun bit of history. The name Niemann itself comes from the Legions of Leto, a Darksider group the Jedi defeated. So the Order took their enemy's fighting philosophy, stripped it for parts, and slapped the conquered group's name on the result, which is, not ideal from a branding perspective. But Niemann reveals something important about what most Jedi actually were. They weren't warriors who happened to know diplomacy. They were diplomats who could hold a lightsaber without embarrassing themselves. Its greatest strength is having zero glaring weaknesses. Its greatest weakness is having zero real strengths. Competence in everything, mastery of nothing. And if that sounds like a form designed to get people killed against anyone with actual specialization, well, wait until you hear about Form 7. Form 7, Juyo, and Vaipad. Every form up to this point follows a basic rule. You learn a discipline, you practice it, you get better. Form 7 throws that entire framework out the window and replaces it with something genuinely unhinged. Juyo is officially described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat ever developed, and it earns that title by requiring something no other form asks for. You have to be angry, not frustrated, not determined. Angry. Juyo practitioners channel negative emotions, internal darkness, and raw aggression into a relentless assault characterized by what the Jedi texts call malignant grace, which is, not a phrase you typically want associated with your martial arts training. Darth Maul and the Grand Inquisitor both demonstrated exactly what Sith mastery of this form looks like. Relentless, overwhelming, and absolutely terrifying to be on the receiving end of. But here's where it gets complicated. For a Sith, Juyo is perfect. You're already swimming in the dark side, so fueling your combat with rage is just Tuesday. For a Jedi, drawing continuously on negative emotions to power your fighting style is basically building a highway straight to the dark side and then acting surprised when you end up there. Which brings us to Mace Windu, who looked at this problem and said, I can fix this. He developed Vaipad, a refined variant described not as a fighting style, but as a state of mind, a path that leads through the penumbra of the dark side. Windu essentially built a controlled pipeline to the dark side's power, siphoned off what he needed for combat, and called it a martial art. That's either the most brilliant or the most reckless thing a Jedi Council member has ever done. Form 7 is simultaneously the most dangerous thing you can throw at an enemy and the most dangerous thing you can do to yourself. Every swing feeds the darkness. Windu walked that razor's edge his entire life and never slipped. But not everyone who picks up 2 lightsabers is trying to flirt with the dark side. Some of them just want twice the blades. Jarkai. Up to this point, every form we've covered follows the same basic assumption. One person, one lightsaber. Jarkai throws that assumption out the window and hands you a second blade. Here's the thing. The name itself comes from a city on Atrisia famous for its dual-blade sword techniques. In Legends material, the Royal Macheteros of the Jarkai system refined dual-weapon combat into an art form long before lightsabers were part of the equation. Once Force users adapted the principles, you could wield 2 standard sabers, pair a full-length blade with a shorter shoto, or if you were feeling particularly unhinged, dual double-bladed lightsabers, which is, 4 blades total. Totally reasonable. Dual wielding didn't really hit the mainstream Star Wars screen until Anakin briefly grabbed a second blade fighting Dooku in Attack of the Clones, and even that was momentary improvisation. It was the Clone Wars animated series that truly put Jarkai on the map. Ahsoka Tano and Asajj Ventress became the poster children for the technique, one on each side of the Force, both absolutely lethal with it. Now here's where people get it wrong. Jarkai isn't a standalone form. It's an augmentation layer. Practitioners blend it with elements of Forms 4, 5, and 6 to build personalized hybrid styles. The second blade doesn't replace your foundation. It complicates it. Your brain has to simultaneously process multiple combat vectors in real time, tracking 2 independent weapon arcs while defending, attacking, and maintaining spatial awareness. One lapse in concentration, one moment where your offhand drifts a half second behind your primary, and you've created a gap that gets you killed. So it looks incredible, it is incredible. But the mental tax is so brutal that most practitioners treat it as a situational tool rather than a permanent commitment. But if Jarkai is about mastering what's in your hands, the next technique is about mastering everything that isn't. The ground beneath your feet, the walls around you, the terrain itself. So can. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. You know exactly what moment I'm referring to. Obi-Wan Kenobi standing on a dirt hill looking down at Anakin and calmly saying, "It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground." Turns out that wasn't just a cool line. That was an entire combat discipline in action. Sokan isn't technically a lightsaber form. It's a principle of combat developed by ancient Jedi Knights during the Great Hyperspace War, and its entire philosophy boils down to one idea: where you fight matters more than how you fight. Practitioners don't just swing a blade well, they transform the battlefield itself into a weapon. Every ledge, every slope, every narrow corridor becomes a tactical advantage if you know how to use it. The technique has two primary applications. First, high ground defense, which is exactly what it sounds like. You take elevated terrain and force your opponent to fight uphill, literally. Second, unhindered charge, where a practitioner uses obstacles and terrain features to close distance rapidly while their opponent is still figuring out the geometry of the space. You're not running at someone, you're running through the environment at someone. Here's what makes Sokan fundamentally different from everything we've covered so far. Every other form is about your blade, your emotions, your stance. Sokan doesn't care about any of that. It cares about spatial awareness, speed, mobility, leaving zero openings in your defense, not because your parries are perfect, but because you've positioned yourself somewhere your opponent literally cannot reach you effectively. It's ecological warfare disguised as sword fighting. But if Sokan is about using the environment as a weapon, the next technique is about using the lightsaber itself in a way that both Jedi and Sith considered straight-up cheating: Trakata. Trakata is the most effective lightsaber technique in the galaxy that almost nobody uses because everyone collectively decided it's cheap. And honestly, it kind of is. This is the combat equivalent of screen looking in a multiplayer game. You're not wrong for doing it. You're just not getting invited back. The concept is simple. You turn your lightsaber off and on during active combat to create openings that shouldn't exist. That's it. You weaponize the power button. Deactivate your saber mid-swing so it phases straight through an opponent's block, then reactivate it on the other side for a killing blow. Or let someone commit to a heavy strike against your blade, then switch it off so they stumble forward into nothing. Completely off balance. Every variation boils down to the same principle. Your opponent expects a blade to be there, and suddenly it isn't. Here's where it gets genuinely funny. Both the Jedi and the Sith independently looked at this technique and said no. The Jedi rejected it because it relied on deception, which clashed with their principles of honor. The Sith rejected it because it lacked raw power and dominance. Two organizations that agree on literally nothing else found common ground on the fact that flickering your sword on and off is beneath them, which is, not ideal for the people who actually died because their opponent refused to use the most tactically devastating tool available. The technique remained almost entirely theoretical. Nobody championed it, nobody built a fighting school around it, and nobody passed it down. It just sat there as a strategy everyone acknowledged was effective and then promptly ignored. A perfectly good weapon gathering dust because it hurt people's feelings. But if you think a technique built on deception is strange, wait until you hear about the lightsaber form that tells you to put your weapon away entirely. Form 0. So we've spent this entire video breaking down increasingly complex ways to swing a laser sword, acrobatic flips, dual-wielding techniques, forms that channel literal rage into blade strikes, and even one that involves turning your weapon off mid-fight to trick people. And after all of that, there's a concept in Jedi philosophy that sits underneath everything. The best fight is the one that never happens. This isn't an official lightsaber form, it's not Form 8 or some secret technique. It's a broader Jedi teaching, sometimes informally referred to as Form 0, and the idea is simple. A true Jedi's first instinct should never be to reach for their weapon. Here's how the philosophy plays out. A Jedi is supposed to exhaust every other option before igniting their blade. Negotiate first, find a diplomatic path. If that fails, use the Force to de-escalate without lethal force. The lightsaber is the absolute last resort, and even then, the goal is to end conflict with as little harm as possible. The ideal outcome is one where the blade never leaves your belt. It sounds beautiful on paper. The ultimate martial mastery is the ability to avoid combat altogether. But here's where it gets complicated. This philosophy was the bedrock of an order that got blindsided by a Sith Lord operating directly under their noses for decades. The galaxy was constantly at war, and the Jedi kept insisting peace was always an option. Some fans argue this mindset wasn't wisdom. It was institutional denial dressed up as philosophy, a belief system so committed to the idea that violence equals failure that it couldn't recognize when diplomacy already had, which is, not ideal when someone's about to execute Order 66. But if this concept represents the Jedi's highest philosophical ideal, the next technique represents the Sith's most psychologically cruel battlefield tactic, Dunmech. Every form we've covered so far has one thing in common. They're all about the blade, how you swing it, how you block with it, how you move around it. Dunmuk throws all of that out the window, because this isn't really a lightsaber form. It's a weapon that uses a lightsaber as a prop. Dunmuk is an exclusively Sith discipline that combines blade work with deliberate psychological warfare. Practitioners fight with their sabers, sure, but the real assault is verbal, taunts, mockery, carefully chosen remarks designed to crack open an opponent's deepest fears and unresolved trauma, all while actively trying to kill them. The goal isn't to defeat your enemy's body, it's to conquer their mind so completely that the body just follows. And here's the thing that makes zero sense on paper. This form, the most psychologically aggressive combat style in Star Wars, demands more mental discipline than almost any other. A Sith using Dunmuk has to stay calm enough to read their opponent's emotions in real time, identify the exact psychological fracture point, and exploit it with surgical precision, all while channeling rage into their blade work. That's not brute force. That's emotional chess at lightsaber speed, but it can backfire catastrophically. Push the wrong button, and instead of breaking your opponent, you enrage them beyond reason. Suddenly, your clever little mind game just handed them the fuel to destroy you, which is, not ideal. What makes Dunmuk the perfect form to end on is what it reveals about the Sith. Everyone assumes dark side combat is all raw power and overwhelming aggression, but this form requires empathy. Twisted, weaponized empathy, but empathy nonetheless. You can't exploit fears you don't understand. The most dangerous combat form in Star Wars doesn't require a blade at all. It just requires a voice and the cruelty to use it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.